Hmm. Hmm.
Hi everyone, Mike here from Bikes by Mike with another cycling related video. I'm back upstairs to talk about daytime running lights. Do they make cyclists safer? How is their use regulated? How should they be used? Okay, let's get to it. I recently reviewed the new Cyclists Fly 12 Sport Dash Cam and Light, and in that video I mainly focused on the video capabilities of the dash cam and its importance to keeping you safe. But it got me thinking that I should really do a separate video on daytime running lights, or DRLs as they're sometimes called. There are many cyclists that don't use a rear tail light during the day, and even more that don't use a front headlight. I think both are really important, and I'll make my case for why they should be your #1 safety accessory for your bike. Part of the reason I'm so surprised that daytime running lights haven't yet received widespread adoption by cyclists is that they have been legally required on automobiles for so many years. Canada has required daytime running lights on all vehicles since 1990. The UK has required DRLs on vehicles since 2011. And while the United States still does not legally require automakers to equip cars sold in the US with DRLs, most of them do so anyways because they recognize the safety benefits in doing so. GM, for example, filed a petition in support of legally requiring DRLs on all vehicles way back in 2001. But this shouldn't be a big surprise, as many of us will remember the backlash in the 1980s to new seatbelt laws. Why should we require drivers and passengers to wear seatbelts? That makes no sense, right? When it comes to daytime running lights on motor vehicles, the evidence is compelling that having front headlights increases the visibility of the driver to others and correspondingly reduces accidents. Studies have reported that DRLs reduce collision rates from a low of 5 to 10%, while others suggest it could be as high as 28%. So by logic, you would think the same safety outcome would exist from the use of DRLs on bicycles, since they're just another type of vehicle. Or maybe more so, since bikes are less conspicuous than automobiles. But for whatever reason, widespread adoption of DRLs on bikes hasn't yet happened. Maybe that's because there hasn't been as much research on DRLs on bicycle as there has been on automobiles. But there has been enough done to demonstrate that there are indeed safety benefits to cyclists and drivers alike. The most often referenced study on cyclists is a Dutch study from 2013. This was a comprehensive, controlled experiment performed with 3,845 cyclists in Odense, Denmark, to examine if permanent running lights mounted on bicycles improves traffic safety for cyclists. Lights were mounted on 1,845 bicycles for 12 months, over which time the accident rate was tracked. This was compared to the control group of 2,000 cyclists who were not using DRLs. Among the study's conclusion was that the incidence rate of accidents producing injuries to cyclists was 19% lower for cyclists with permanent running lights over those cyclists without. More impressively, there was a 47% reduction in injury causing accidents involving more than one person. The study authors concluded that permanent bicycle running lights significantly improves traffic safety for cyclists. The reason for the reduced collision rate for cyclists using DRLs is that they are more visible to drivers. Research has shown that a whopping 270% increase in driver recognition of a cyclist with a flashing rear light as compared to one without. Can you see the difference? I can see the difference. One could argue that the rate at which drivers are colliding with cyclists will only get worse as distracted drivers are becoming more and more of a problem on our roads. The National Highway Traffic Safety Administration estimates that at any given moment in the United States, about 660,000 people are using mobile phones behind the wheel, and 2.2% of all drivers are text messaging or visibly manipulating handheld devices at any time. This figure has almost quadrupled over the past decade. In 2020, 3,142 people died on American roads as a result of distracted drivers. Now, is there any advantage of using a steady light or solid light in the front or rear of the bike? Here, the research is inconclusive, and quite frankly, there just hasn't been enough research in this area. Now that we've established that daytime running lights at the front and rear of a bike should always be used, next is the big controversial issue of whether one should set their lights to flash mode or steady mode. And should this differ for riding at night versus during the day? The case against the use of flashing lights is that while flashing lights may improve your chance of getting noticed, a couple studies have found that they also make it harder for other road users to judge your speed and distance. This clearly is not a good thing. In addition to confusing drivers about your whereabouts, flashing bike lights have been shown to have a negative impact on people with photosensitive epilepsy. Yikes. Anecdotally, as a cyclist, I know that it can be irritating to be around a cyclist with flashing lights, particularly one approaching you, and particularly if it's spewing out some massive lumens like many of the modern daylights do today. All of us have experienced a situation of being approached in the opposite direction by cyclists with a massive front flashing light and being temporarily blinded by the beam. Sure, this can happen with a powerful solid front light, but the flashing light exacerbates the issue. And while the blinking light does attract more attention, sometimes too much attention is a bad thing, even when it comes to cyclist safety. Some traffic experts have spoken about the moth effect, where drivers have a tendency to veer closer to lights, especially flashing lights, that they mean to avoid. A 2018 study by the National Surface Transportation Safety Center for Excellence, that's a mouthful, concluded that flashing hazard lights resulted in longer fixation durations, which could potentially lead to drivers steering towards a vehicle with its flashing lights engaged. This is not a good thing if you're a cyclist.
One of the often studied reasons is called the moth effect. It's controversial and its results are much studied, but it's built on the premise that much like a moth is drawn to light, so too are motorists, especially flashing lights. Some studies go beyond the draw of the light to the fact that when you take your attention off the road and to the side, your sense of what's straight ahead is now altered to that side, and you tend to steer in that direction.
So for me, my preference is to use a solid light in the front and rear of my bike in both daylight and nighttime situations. I think it's a nice balance of making me visible to others while not pissing too many people off. But in practice, I typically use a solid white light in the front and a flashing red light for the rear. I started using a flashing red rear light because I think most cyclists and drivers just expect the rear light of the bike to be flashing for some reason. I remember one time I was cycling in North Carolina and a driver pulled up beside me, rolled down his window and said, "You know, your rear light isn't flashing. You may want to put it in flashing mode so drivers see you better." He was a super friendly guy, so I just said, "Thank you, I'll put it in flashing mode," and that's what I did. In most countries, it's against the law to ride at night without lights. Usually a white light in the front and a red light in the rear. Most countries do not require daytime running lights, either mounted or used on the bicycle. Here in my hometown of Toronto, Section 62, subsection 17 of the Highway Traffic Act for Ontario states that a white or amber front headlight and a rear taillight is required for night riding. Subsection 17.1 states that the red taillight may be flashing. However, Section 169, subsection 2 specifically prohibits the use of white flashing headlights on any vehicle, including bicycles. And the same is true in Washington State in the USA. The UK also requires front and rear lights on bicycles after dark, but has no requirement for daytime running lights, and no prohibition for front flashing lights. The Netherlands requires both front and rear lights to be mounted on all bicycles, and these to be turned on when riding in the dark or when visibility is poor. Both front and rear flashing lights are prohibited. So you can see that the laws differ quite a bit based on where in the world you're located. So you should check the laws within your own jurisdiction. And that's pretty much all I have to say about daytime running lights and why and how they should be used. I hope some of this has been helpful. If you have any questions or comments, please pass them along. I know there are a lot of different views on this topic, so I'd like to hear what you think about this issue. That's all I got for today, folks. If you like this video, please give me a thumbs up and share it with your friends. And if you're not subscribing to this channel, please subscribe, as it allows me to produce more content for all of you. See you next time. Happy rolling.